Good morning, Alex and friends. I'm Grace. Today is Wednesday, July 15th, 2026, and you're listening to Alex's News. In Riverside today, expect a high temperature of 98.8 degrees with a low of 70.3 degrees. Please remember to keep cool and drink plenty of water as you go about your day. On today's episode, we investigate the factors fueling the latest rise in military friction between the United States and Iran. We will also take a closer look at why the University of California system is re-evaluating its stance on bringing back standardized testing requirements for students. In addition to these main reports, we will cover several other headlines making waves around the globe. There is plenty of information to get through, so be sure to stay tuned for all that and more here on Alex's News. A quick heads up before we dive in. This story includes descriptions of military strikes and civilian casualties. The U.S.-Iran conflict we've been tracking has now tipped into active fighting, with fresh blockades and airstrikes over the last 24 hours. Ethan, you've been following this closely. Where do things stand today?
Right, Grace. So as we reported Tuesday, President Trump had declared the June ceasefire over, and now we're seeing the fallout in real time. Yesterday, July 14th, at 4 p.m. Eastern, the United States reimposed a full naval blockade on ships traveling to and from Iranian ports. According to CNBC, that same blockade was in place between April and June, then lifted after a temporary ceasefire and a 14-point memorandum of understanding signed just last month. Now it's back, and both sides are blaming each other for wrecking the deal.
A blockade sounds massive. What kind of force is the U.S. actually putting behind it?
It's substantial. CBS News reports that U.S. Central Command, or CENTCOM, has deployed more than 20 Navy warships and hundreds of military aircraft across the Middle East. The U.S. frames this as targeting Iranian ships and their customers specifically. And CNBC says ship tracking firms are already seeing a sharp drop in commercial traffic through the region. Interestingly, though, Iran's oil minister Mohsen Paknejad claims crude exports are unaffected, thanks to what he calls sanctions-resistant mechanisms.
And I understand this wasn't just a blockade, there were strikes too?
That's right. Alongside the blockade, the U.S. launched a wave of precision strikes. CNN and CNBC report they began at 3 p.m. Eastern Tuesday and lasted 7 hours. That makes it the fourth consecutive night of U.S. attacks. Fighter aircraft, drones, and naval vessels hit missile and drone sites, naval facilities, and coastal defense systems near the Strait of Hormuz.
Do we know specifically what was targeted on the ground?
We do, and the detail here is striking. CNN specifies the targets included guard posts, barracks, a guest house, and accommodation facilities at a military base in Bampur. They also hit a maritime traffic control center in Chabahar, and there were explosions reported on Hengam Island and in the port city of Bandar Abbas. So this wasn't just weapons depots. These were places where people live and work.
That raises the obvious question. What's the human cost been so far?
It's been significant, Grace. Iranian government spokesperson Fatemeh Mohajirani told CNN that more than 30 civilians have been killed in recent days. A health ministry spokesperson told CBS News that overnight strikes injured more than 260 people. And the Iranian army confirmed at least 7 military personnel died at a base near Iranshar. So the casualty numbers are climbing on both the civilian and military sides.
And Iran hasn't just absorbed these blows. How have they hit back?
No, they've responded forcefully, with what officials are calling hostile aerial aggressions. The strikes have targeted both U.S. infrastructure and America's regional allies. Kuwait was hit hard. CNN geolocated video showing an Iranian drone striking a warehouse there. CBS News reports the Kuwaiti military intercepted 5 cruise missiles, 33 drones, and 1 ballistic missile. And an Iranian strike on a Kuwaiti naval vessel injured 4 service members.
Kuwait's a close partner. What about the other Gulf states and neighbors?
Jordan and Bahrain were both drawn in. Jordan's military reported shooting down 3 Iranian missiles on Wednesday. Meanwhile, the IRGC claimed it destroyed several US MQ-9 drones and struck hangars housing US fighter jets at the Al Azraq Air Base, according to CNN. In Bahrain, the IRGC said it targeted fuel storage, warehouses, and a command and control center used by the U.S. Fifth Fleet. Bahrain's defense force confirmed they intercepted what they called treacherous Iranian aerial attacks.
This is clearly spilling well beyond just the two countries. Has it reached anyone else?
It has, and this part underscores how global the impact is. CBS News reports that India summoned the Iranian deputy chief of mission to protest attacks on two tankers, the Mount Mombasa and the Mount Al-Bahia. Those attacks killed one Indian seafarer. So you have countries with no direct stake in this fight now losing citizens and demanding answers. It's a reminder that the Strait of Hormuz is one of the world's most critical shipping corridors.
Speaking of shipping, what's all this doing to oil and the markets?
The economic fallout is already sharp. CNN reports that Brent crude rose to $85 a barrel, and West Texas Intermediate reached nearly $80. Bloomberg notes oil prices have surged 20% since the attacks rekindled. And that's the thing listeners will feel most directly, because when crude spikes like this, it eventually shows up at the gas pump and ripples through the broader economy.
Let's turn to the White House. What's President Trump saying now?
He's escalating his rhetoric. In a Fox News interview, Trump renewed threats to strike Iranian power plants and bridges, quote, next week, end quote, unless Tehran returns to the negotiating table. He warned that without a deal, Iran may, quote, not have anybody left, end quote. And notably, he vaguely alluded to the possibility of a ground campaign, suggesting that others might conduct it on behalf of the U.S. So he's leaving that door open without committing American troops directly.
There was also that controversial toll on the strait. Whatever happened with that?
This was a real about-face, Grace. CNBC highlights that Trump initially proposed a 20% reimbursement toll on all cargo transiting the Strait of Hormuz. That met swift opposition from the International Maritime Organization and shipping industry groups. Then, after calls from leaders in Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, Bahrain, and Kuwait, Trump reversed the fee entirely. He now says he'll replace it with, quote, trade and investment deals, end quote, from those Gulf states instead.
Beyond the military side, is the U.S. applying other kinds of pressure?
Yes, there's a financial front to all this, too. CBS News reports that Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent froze over $130 million in digital assets controlled by the Central Bank of Iran. And CNBC says the Treasury imposed sanctions on shipping magnate Mohammed Hossein Shamkhani, aiming to dismantle what they describe as an illicit shipping empire used for oil exports. So the U.S. is squeezing Iran's finances alongside the military campaign.
And how's the rest of the world reacting to all of this?
The reactions are pretty split. UN Rights Chief Volker Turk has called for an immediate return to the ceasefire. Here at home, U.S. senators are divided along party lines. Republican Senator John Hoeven is calling for European aid to help reopen the strait. Meanwhile, Democratic Senator Richard Blumenthal is criticizing the Trump administration's whole strategy, according to CBS News. So, there's no unified front, even domestically.
So bottom line, Ethan, is there any off-ramp here, or is this only heading in one direction?
Honestly, Grace, it's precarious. Trump's threats point to more strikes as soon as next week, if Iran doesn't come to the table. And Iran keeps retaliating against U.S. assets and neighbors. Diplomatic channels have stalled since Ali Khamenei's funeral. The one glimmer is that Gulf states clearly have influence, since they got Trump to drop that toll. If anyone can broker a pause, it may be them. But right now, the momentum is toward escalation, not de-escalation.
Sobering stuff. Ethan, thank you for breaking it all down for us.
Anytime, Grace. We'll keep tracking it closely.
Welcome back. This morning we're digging into a fight over the SAT and ACT at the University of California. Our education reporter Chloe has been following it closely. Chloe, good morning. What's happening here?
Good morning, Grace. So as of today, July 15th, the entire UC system is caught up in a high-stakes debate over standardized testing in undergraduate admissions. After a string of meetings and public testimony, the Board of Regents Chair Maria Anguiano made an announcement yesterday, July 14th. She said the UC Academic Senate now has to finish a review of the SAT and ACT by June 2027. That's the headline that set everything in motion.
June 2027. Is that sooner than the original plan?
Much sooner, actually. According to the Los Angeles Times, there was an earlier plan approved back in June, but it was withdrawn on Friday, July 10th, just days ago. Under that shelved version, written recommendations wouldn't have arrived until May 2027. And the earliest students who might have had to submit scores were those applying in fall 2028. So the university could have stayed test-free all the way to the fall 2029 application cycle.
So people thought the whole review was being scrapped?
Right, that was the initial confusion. Both the Los Angeles Times and CalMatters reported that folks weren't sure if the review had been killed entirely. But Ahmet Palazoglu, who chairs the Academic Senate, stepped in to clarify. He said the Senate isn't backing away from its commitment to the review at all. They're simply revising the timeline and speeding things up.
And I understand there's a second, separate review too?
There is, and it's important not to confuse the two. That June 2027 deadline applies specifically to standardized testing. But there's a whole other review looking at the so-called AG high school course requirements. Those are the 15 classes students must pass with a grade of C or higher just to be eligible for admission. That piece is being handled on a completely different track, and the Academic Senate is set to meet on July 22nd to figure out how to approach it.
Let's talk about who wants the test back, who's pushing hardest.
It's largely the UC faculty driving this, Grace. CalMatters and the Los Angeles Times report that more than 2,000 STEM professors signed a petition urging the reinstatement of these tests for STEM majors by fall 2027. And on top of that, nearly 1,000 additional professors from other disciplines went further. They called for a full, system-wide reinstatement across every major.
What's their core argument for bringing the tests back?
Their big concern is that high school grades just aren't reliable anymore. Professors like UC Berkeley's Mina Aganagic and UC Santa Barbara's Pradeep Sen point to grade inflation and the growing use of artificial intelligence in student assignments. They say incoming students are arriving with serious gaps in math, writing, and basic reasoning. Professor Sen described a, quote, steep decline, end quote, in student abilities and argues a standardized baseline is necessary because high school standards vary too widely.
That's a striking claim. Did the other professor add to it?
She did. Professor Aganagic argued that without these tests, introductory college courses end up wasting resources. Essentially, they're forced to reteach elementary and middle school material to students who should already know it. So from the faculty's point of view, a standardized test gives them a consistent way to measure whether students are actually ready for college-level work, regardless of which high school they came from.
But plenty of people disagree. What are the opponents saying?
The opponents argue the SAT and ACT are just flawed measures of academic potential. Jesse Ryan, president of the Campaign for College Opportunity, told CalMatters and KPBS, by way of CalMatters, that the tests measure wealth and race more than readiness. Her point is that low-income students often can't afford expensive test preparation services, so the scores end up reflecting a family's bank account as much as a student's ability.
Is there agreement on how to fix the readiness gap then?
Well, that's where it gets interesting. Pamela Birdman of Just Equations echoed Ryan's concerns, but she offered a different solution. She suggested the real answer to readiness gaps is better math instruction, not standardized testing. So both sides actually agree students need to be more prepared. They just disagree completely on whether a test is the right tool to get them there.
What about the students themselves? Do they have a voice in this?
They absolutely do. The UC Student Association, which represents 237,000 undergraduates, sent a letter to the regents opposing the return of the SAT. Their argument is that the tests simply don't produce better prepared students, and they point to something notable that happened after the tests were removed in 2020. Racial and ethnic diversity at the UC actually increased, while graduation rates did not decline.
So the data since 2020 backs them up?
That's their case, yes. Research cited by Jesse Ryan suggests graduation rates have actually gone up, and retention rates have stayed stable ever since the switch to test-free admissions. So supporters of the current system say, look, the university has been running without these tests for years now, and by these measures things haven't gotten worse. In some ways, they argue, they've gotten better.
There's also a federal angle here, isn't there?
There is, and it looms over everything. The Los Angeles Times reports that the Trump administration has demanded the UC use and turnover test scores to prove it's admitting the most qualified students. The administration is alleging racial discrimination and has launched multiple investigations into UC admissions practices. UC officials, for their part, have denied any wrongdoing. So this whole review is unfolding under real political pressure from Washington.
Remind us how the UC got to a test-free system in the first place.
Sure. The UC moved toward a test-free or test-optional model back in 2020 and 2021. And here's the twist, Grace. That original decision by the Board of Regents was unanimous, and it actually overruled a recommendation from the UC Academic Senate at the time, which wanted to keep the tests. The Regents even briefly considered creating a UC-specific test of their own. But a committee later decided that process would just take too long.
So the roles have almost flipped since then. Who actually has the power to bring the tests back?
That's the key procedural point. Even though the Academic Senate does the research and makes recommendations, both the Los Angeles Times and Cal Matters emphasize that only the Board of Regents can unilaterally reinstate the SAT, and there's a specific process. The board must first hear at least one informational item on its agenda. Only then can it vote on any proposed policy change at a later meeting.
So if the regents do decide to bring testing back, how soon could students feel it?
It could move fairly quickly. If the regents support that June 2027 recommendation, they could potentially require scores as early as the fall 2027 application period. That would affect students enrolling in fall 2028. But they've also left themselves room to pick a later date to give high school students more time to prepare, so the exact timing is still very much an open question.
Big picture, Chloe, what should families be watching for next?
I'd keep an eye on two dates. First, that July 22nd Academic Senate meeting, where they'll decide how to handle the separate AG course requirements review. And then, longer term, that June 2027 deadline for the testing recommendation itself. Between the faculty petitions, the student opposition, and the federal investigations, this is really a collision of academic, political, and equity concerns. However the regents rule, it'll shape who gets into California's public universities for years.
Really important stuff for a lot of families out there. Chloe, thank you for breaking it all down for us.
Happy to, Grace. I'll keep tracking it and bring you updates as those meetings unfold.
That's our education reporter, Chloe. We'll be right back after this. Here are some other headlines. The Trump administration is putting the brakes on ICE vehicle stops nationwide. This voluntary pause, which lasts until September 9th, is meant to give officers a chance to get their act together with more training and a review of recent incidents. It is a temporary stopgap, not a full policy change, according to official Tom Homan, and it will not slow down overall arrests. However, officers can still hit the road when working with partner agencies or executing criminal warrants. This decision comes after a bumpy road involving two deadly shootings of motorists in Houston, Texas, and Biddeford, Maine. Senator Susan Collins had urged the administration to steer clear of non-urgent stops after the Maine tragedy, which marks the 9th time deadly force has been used since the January 2025 crackdown. Meanwhile, Representative Christian Menefee says training won't fix deep-seated issues and worries enforcement is becoming too militarized. Adding to the tension, reports show officers were not wearing body cameras during those two fatal encounters. Moving to the Department of Justice, Todd Blanche is looking to take the wheel as the nominated Attorney General. He is scheduled to face the music before the Senate Judiciary Committee on July 15 and 16, 2026. He has a steep climb to a confirmation vote, as the organization World Without Exploitation is calling for his rejection over alleged failures to redact victim information in the Epstein files. Survivor Danielle Bensky has been invited to testify. Pro-life groups are also pushing for a change in course regarding the mail distribution of mifepristone. Furthermore, a requested $1,800,000,000 anti-weaponization fund is facing a bipartisan roadblock. With the passing of Senator Lindsey Graham, Senator Tom Tillis has become a pivot point for the vote. While he has a positive predisposition toward Blanche, he has expressed doubts about those funds and nominees sympathetic to January 6th. In more legal news, E. Jean Carroll has finally seen the money. Over $5,600,000 was transferred on July 13th from a court escrow account to her lawyer, Roberta Kaplan. This follows a finding that Donald Trump sexually abused her in 1996 and defamed her in 2022. Despite his lawyers trying to block the transfer, the Supreme Court let the verdict stand, and Ms. Carroll plans to put those funds into a retirement account for a rainy day. Over in California, the law is playing a game of make-believe with Perkins operations, where undercover officers pose as inmates to trick suspects into confessing. While these stings have secured hundreds of murder convictions, the Ninth District Court of Appeal recently ruled that statements from Jason Zapata were inadmissible. However, the California Supreme Court stepped in on May 6th, meaning Zapata will have to wait for a new trial. While prosecutors love these tools, critics say they are coercive and unfairly target Black and Latino communities. Finally, the Supreme Court is asking Congress for a safety net, requesting $15 million more for security due to threats facing the justices. That's all we have for now. Today's episode was made by Alexander King with Claude Opus 4.8, Gemini Pro 3.1, Gemini Flash 3, and Google Cloud Text-to-Speech. I hope you have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow, Alex.